We opened now on the 13th of March, will be open until the 1st of May. For the exhibition and the whole project that's revolved around, it's been an intense research project for about 3 years. And all of the beautiful pieces inside of the exhibition speaks volumes and have their own reflections, but I thought today and tomorrow it would be good to touch upon different entry points and topics that relate to what we have sort of been researching there. And for our first talk, we have what we have termed, or so Eric so beautifully termed as reflection notes. And we just wanted to have this casual setting of us journeying together and bring up topics that Eric will bring up, and Viola Joska, who so generously is present here, even though just arriving from a flight from Vilnius, and myself, and just to introduce it, and just to give you also a brief introduction to that as well with Eric and Viola at the time before they will give their talk. But I want to start first.
Hello.
To talk a little bit about the exhibition. And
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Because it's so small, I think it's important for everybody to introduce themselves.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I love it.
But maybe you're introducing them.
Yeah.
We'll do that after.
Introduce them
Yeah.
when we have to talk. So maybe we have our small circle. What do you want to say?
Oh my God, I'm so happy to do that. Hi, I'm Tinna. I'm very interested in this project. I work in the arts. I work in the periphery in the arts, like
What's that?
in the countryside, a lot. Yes, thank you.
I met you a long time ago too.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
At Save Stories.
Yes, that's the periphery. Yeah.
Do you still live there?
I have a house there, but I'm currently in Reykjavik. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
I'm Aziz. I'm in the exhibition.
You will talk later after.
And I will be talking for an hour, so you can really get an introduction about me quite deeply if you want. Yes.
I'm Sophie, and I'm currently studying in the University of the Arts of Iceland in the MA Design program. But I'm coming from Germany, so I'm only here for this term. But yeah, I'm interested in the topic, and we have like similar research topics in our studies. That's why I'm here.
I'm Lee. I'm a landscape designer from Providence, Rhode Island.
I'm Ruth Phoebe, and I'm an ecologist at Lampuna Haskori, and I'm also talking tomorrow.
My name is Julius. I'm a friend of Eric's.
You're what?
Friend of Eric's.
But you're also many others.
That's why I'm here mostly.
So he literally dragged you.
No, at all. I just told you about it happening, so hey, welcome.
Julius is a famous musician.
What?
Also a very helpful person. My name's Eric. I met this at this performance that I gave at the National Archive. Maybe you can tell people about it. I feel weird talking about that project.
Yes.
But Julius actually helped me significantly on this project. But you should mention it maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm also an artist.
It was a part of the Sequence Festival last fall, and it was quite an impactful lecture, and just in general an event that was created and a presence of people attending. And you presented their documents that you and Julius had gathered.
Yeah.
And this was in relation to documents that are recently sort of being reviewed in the National Archive, showing how Iceland at the time of 1930s, 40s denied refugees of Jewish origin, Jewish or asylum seekers asylum.
Yeah, but knowingly denied. So like these Jewish asylum seekers were describing their life at that moment, and the Minister of Justice would write notes on these documents, people describing their lives. Sometimes it would just be denied, but sometimes there would be other kinds of messages, like we read a whole bunch of different kinds of messages that were sort of actively denying, knowing that these people were gonna die.
Yeah.
Or potentially die.
And it's really reflects strongly on how immigration policy is as of today in Iceland. So it's important to review those documents and have that discussion. So I invited Eric also today because I think his approach in ecology and practice is really very much related to what we're working here. So with this exhibition.
My name is Viola. I'm an art worker. I woke up today at 3:20 Vilnius time. So if I will at some point I will not know what to say, please forgive me. I am an art worker, so that means that I do arts installation things, and I'm also part of this exhibition and this part of the seminar, and I'm also part of collective Beyond the Post-Soviet.
Why do you use the word art worker?
Because I don't want to use artist. I feel like I don't like the form, the idea of artist in West in general, like being somebody that it's really being romanticized. That's why I don't, because I perceive art also as a form of labor, and I don't want to, and I feel like very often artists being very romanticized in society. That's why I refuse to use term artist.
Yeah, my name is Bryndís Björnsdóttir. I also just go by Isa. Please join us.
And we have one more person that has introduced himself. Actually, two more people. Yes.
My name is Mira Reiter. I'm here from Switzerland, from Zurich today, mainly because of the seas. We are working together since nearly 2 years, and because of the pandemic, have not been able to see each other.
We literally the last time, this was the last trip I took before the pandemic was in Zurich in January 2020. So
it seemed like a good idea to meet in Iceland. And yeah, I think the project is really interesting. I'm a literary scholar and a curator myself, and I work a lot with memory cultures, and recently a lot with Swiss colonial entanglements, and have done a few projects also working kind of collaboratively with artists and cultural workers from colonies, and so this exchange. So yeah, curious to be here.
Hi, I'm Martha. I'm a student on the MA Fine at Bristol House School. I'm just writing my thesis at the moment, and our tutor sent a link to the event over the weekend, and it just sounds like I couldn't miss it. So it's
And that's Sean.
Yes.
Yes. You want to introduce yourself, Sam?
I helped set up the exhibition here.
Looks good.
And
Amazing job.
I'm trying to get the live stream recorded here. Just might be moving around some cameras.
Make sure.
And making sure sounds, just getting it all tuned in for.
And we're on live stream now, basically.
Yes.
And maybe open my laptop just to see.
Maybe also to note in our schedule we have mentioned Andreas Hoffman was going to join us. Unfortunately, because of weather in Norway, he was stuck there and sort of had to catch the next flight to Greenland. He might pop up online. We'll see how that works out, and also in our setting and technology-wise. But he would have loved to be present here in person. But we'll see if we find also maybe like tomorrow we could have a bit of a conversation about his practice in Greenland. Arctic Culture Lab is his organization that he's running there. And just to give a brief introduction to his work. So yeah, thank you for suggesting this. I think it's nice to getting to know each other and how why we're here and our interest and maybe I'll just start to talk a little bit about how this project came to be.
Lisa, I think you might have to speak a little bit louder because
Yes.
here there's echo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So soundscape is a bit
Yeah.
So it was in 2019. So the title was not COVID related, and sort of course, has gotten its own context and evolved, and it's been interesting to stay and linger a little bit with it and what kind of different connotations it has, of course, today. And discussions should we change it, should we keep it, but we decided just to go along with it and see how it would, evolve with our time and our project in general. 2019, I created this framework. In my previous practice, I worked a lot with deep colonial practices and thinking about Nordic exceptionalism and whiteness and trying to revise that history and understand my relationality to those threats. I came across and I understood more clearly at that time that there's this report that was written in 1772 or published then, and it's been used as sort of like a source of Icelandic national identity. Like it's been placed on that kind of pedestal. This is a source of a report that says about the living conditions and the nature of Iceland. But the reality of it is a different kind. If you look into the historical origin of why it was written and on which terms, is that the Danish king ordered two Icelanders, a physician and a poet, Gert Ólafsson and Bjarni Pálsson, to travel around the island for 5 years and gather data about the natural resources for any kind of utilization on the parts of Denmark. Iceland was at that time a colony of Denmark and was for about 500 years. So it wasn't until 1943 that this report was translated to Icelandic. Before that it was written in Danish, translated to German, French, English, and so it wasn't really meant to be as a import read by the Republic of Iceland.
Why is there any cue as to why that is?
No, in 1943, that's right before the independence. So that's, I think that, like I mentioned, that this report was viewed as a national identity, so it was being elevated as such. So I sort of link it to that moment in time,
You can make some pretty clear assumptions as to why it wasn't translated.
Right, exactly. And I should have brought my copies here. It's a very detailed report, particularly in Danish and Icelandic. Other languages like English it's a bit shorter. It's more like a travel essay. The editor also mentioned that there were a lot of boring parts. I skipped them. I didn't, they were not of interest to me. He speaks in first person, the translator in English. So you get a more travel essay, highlighting the aspects of what the translators for those editions wanted to present. But we as a group, I invited artists that I thought it was really important to discuss this report from a very diverse practices. And I also wanted to focus on collectives, so I invited a lot of collectives, of course, because we wanted to revise it in a more collaborative, cluster kind of setting. COVID came, there was delays, of course, and which means we had to change our methodology. So we expanded our time of practicing, and it went more from meeting online and then having individual research sessions in Iceland. And I would say just in our talk, where we want to sort of focus on unburying some kind of our past and finding reflections there. There's a lot of what I loved, your terminology of newest surfaces that we have mapped in our research. And I would love also just to give you a tour of the exhibition, and for people online, please join us if you can in this space. But we also have detailed text about each process online, and we'll present some images from the exhibition there. And I don't want to speak too much and keep up the time, but just to mention like a few research points that have been dove into and to map out a little bit the interest points of each participant. Hanson Matter collective for Berlin, Sander Nicolina Nielsen, and Tim Wanderloo, they focused on, I want to maybe put on the next slide and see, I'm like totally managing here. This is just an image of the exhibition. For maybe slides can be showed on the live streams of some of the images of the exhibition. Hanson Matter, they worked with the Icelandic banana. So we heard about this concept, and they went into thinking about what is this kind of like exotic Norse narration being portrayed by, you know, elevating this notion that in the North you can, there's the production of banana. And they researched and found out that in 1939 there was a ban of importing fruits to Iceland because of the world crisis. Like, so currency is used, was not, there was a ban of importing such products. So the Hlín Eiríksdóttir brought a plant from London, but botanical gardens there, and started to grow it with her father, and later on in Borgarnes it became like a commercial production of banana and was sold in Reykjavik. And it wasn't until, you know, the ban of import was lifted, and then the production sort of slowed down, and the way that it was grown in Borgarnes was in this wooden greenhouse. It was a geothermal energy, the heating, and natural daylight, but it was made of wood, so sort of started to create the infrastructure itself. And they relate and sort of make a connection to that in their installation, where they placed papers that they made of banana leaves on the walls of this institution. So I think as a new surface, there's a lot to unbury or reveal from what it means today to keep aloft this notion of nation branding, that this island has so much abundance of natural resources that they can grow any kind of plant, which this is not the case. I mean, the geothermal waters is not a source that, you know, the level of the waters are slowly being lowered. And as well, they found out that one Danish worker of the Agricultural University, he was starting to grow the plant, the Icelandic banana in Denmark. So you have all of these threads of colonial relations and connections there. Anna Rosa Krøyer Holmes, he was working with porcelain and the history of kaolin source that is found in the book. She traveled to Mókollsdalur, which is in the northwest of Iceland, and found this source of kaolin, the main substance of porcelain, and with a good, you know, relation with the farmer, we went there and made a hike. Her practice is very much involved with decolonializing the history of Denmark, and also looking into the whiteness that is associated with that. And her installation very beautifully sort of reflects on things about what is apparently was on a ship in the West Indies, which was a colony of Denmark, but he doesn't know why. But later on he became an eye doctor studying color blindness. So color blindness is another nuance surface or related to colonial history, because in Denmark the colonial discourse there has been focused on, are there blind spots in our history, or they presented as such. And they talk even about color blindness, and we just had a conversation yesterday about, which I think is problematic in a way, and also Anna Rosa touches upon that in her installation. It's a way I perceive it of not completely owning up to that history if you say, well, it was just not in the periphery of my sight. Paul Hauke Björnsson works about data collection in the book and sort of revises and thinks about what other ways of collecting data as of today of nature. The two Icelanders that were doing the colonial report, they actually were ordered by the Danish king to study the scientific methods of enlightenment. So Paul was revising this notion of that approach to nature and how we collect the data, and trying to have other thought processes there. Setu Soleimani is an Iranian-American artist. She was looking into the fuel sources mentioned in the report and focused a lot on peat, and also other narrations of burning birds as fuel source or mixing seaweed and fish remains. And she also traveled to Karmuk, the largest dam in Europe, and her installation is portraying some of her research material in that topic. Then we have the Many-Headed Hydra, which is a collector that I am myself a part of, and Assis, and Emma Wolf-Howe, and Susa Horster. And the focus there was not so much related to what's being brought up in the report, but more on the new building of industrial harbour in Finnafjörður in northeast of Iceland, and also in Gwadar in Pakistan, sort of having the same prospects of capitalistic doomsday, of being profitable when the ice has melted enough in 50 years. And we as a collective brought that under the umbrella of the exhibition within an exhibition, Harbour Failures, projecting different kind of thoughts of future aspects that can be related to those two locations, or connecting them together, as well as bringing Richard Burton into the mix, remixing him, ghosting him, and presenting him in those locations. There in the installation we have also invited two artists, Pia Arke, who was a Greenlandic Denmark Inuit, and we're very honored to show her video piece, Archipelagic. Please have a look. And her methodology is what she termed as autoethnography. So she was not looking into post-colonial approaches, but wanting to revise the already approaches of the colonizers and make it their own. The video piece is called Archipelagic. There she found in the archives of the New York Explorer Club a image that said, was an image of a naked Inuit woman in a very bad mental state, and saying underneath Archipelagic. So the white explorer was pathologizing the state or the response of that woman to their presence. And in her video piece, she beautifully does an autoethnographic approach of revising that history. Sara Markani is an artist from Pakistan. We will learn more about her practice and her work, our piece, Oceanic Feelings, later on after our talk. She will be present with her online, and Assis will have that talk. Today also we're launching a magazine and a video essay
with all
the many additions and layers that we have in that exhibition. And also what we show in there is the last specimen that is thought to have survived from the travels of the colonial reporting. And this is interesting artifact, I think, because it has a lot of things still to be unraveled or revealed, because during the time that the report was made, they were, I guess, and Bjarni were asked to send all of their specimens to a scientific community in Denmark. And I contacted them, the Geologist Museum, and also, dug a little bit around with persons that are more knowledgeable about this past. And apparently, these specimens have been lost while the museum was moving houses. So the only specimen thought to have survived.
Sounds like the global south, I have to be honest. Things get lost all the time.
They get lost.
Yeah. But you brought up a nice point when we were walking through the exhibition yesterday. Have you thought of why is this sample in the Natural History Institute?
Well, there was an active gesture to send that back.
But from where? This is from Denmark.
Denmark sent the artifact back here.
How?
Was it requested by the Icelandic government? Was it what was that interaction like?
Right.
Because it might lead you into some other kind of conduits of learning about the power struggle that was present.
Yeah. Because of course there's been this big momentum of bringing the scripts back from Denmark, which is very much tied to Iceland's identity. But there's never been a call for the specimen, although I don't want to elevate it to that national level. But it's interesting what are those specimens and what relations do they have to that history, and why were they discarded in that way? And the specimens that we have in the exhibition are these small shells. And when graciously got it borrowed from the Natural History Institute, they mentioned, well, they're not of such great importance as specimens as such, but they have this historical value. So they're very humble free cells, but we very appreciated to have an installation. So how we thought to construct this very casual talk, and we touching upon some of the research projects, and they have many other different layers and depths, and I hope I can have a view of the exhibition and come for some guidance, and I can walk around with you and talk more, and or the artist and text in the catalog and online. Yeah.
So you created the framework 2018?
19, yeah.
19, and we're in the exhibition now.
Yes.
But what happened along the way?
Yes.
No, just break it down a little bit. Just
yeah.
It's a completely different world that we live in.
Yeah.
Literally from 2018 to 2022.
I mean,
right.
As one of the artists, I still remember an email in January 2020 being sent about this invitation, and I have revisited this email coming here, and I was like, what is this email? It just feels like a different world, in which someone invited you, and it was completely differently planned, but I don't want you to.
Yes. I mean, I've done research projects like this before, and they can grow as monsters, and they can take a lot of, the last one I did took 6 years, so I thought, well, let's do it in 1 year. Let's do it casual.
yeah.
Let's meet for 1 week in Iceland in the summer of 2020, and let's do the exhibition fall 2020.
2021, I thought it was going to happen spring, no?
That was a different layer than that layer. There were a lot of those. That did not happen, so we had to rearrange and think about how to work. In February 2020, I think our email communication could be a nice publication for everything that's going through.
It's every week that's a different plan, right?
Yes.
Because in the first month of COVID, basically.
Yeah, I was living in Berlin at the time. I went to Denmark, I was going to Iceland to prepare for some things for our project. But I went to Copenhagen, and I went to the National Archive there to see the original manuscript. And this was just COVID was just starting, we couldn't understand what this phenomenon or effect it would have. And I know I sent all of you an email saying that we went to the National Archive, and because of COVID, we needed to stay together, me, Anna Rosa, and Sandra, and a group like tied together. We couldn't like be spread out. And it's like this is so nicely tied to our methodology. We like clusters in the art. And as when I think about it today, that is very insensitive to the great impact that the whole pandemic had, and me very naive to and even understanding the engagement of that. But yes, so that happened, and we just formulated more meetings alike. Everybody introducing the research topic and the interest, and also having some invited speakers, spreading it out a little bit, while we waited to understand what happened. Then we met in Iceland, but we didn't meet. Like every person came individually, had a laboratory. Okay. So it wasn't until our opening, our installation, that we got meet some of us. Some came, like Iceland came now. Orlando will come with Roots in April.
And I mean, I think it's also important to state that the two people who are from the Global South in this exhibition are me and Orlando. Because Orlando is from Jamaica and I'm from, like, as in the sense, like, the passports. I'm actually coming from, like, living in the US, but the passports that we hold is Jamaican and Pakistani. And I think we're the ones who also couldn't make it for different times because of different visa situations. So, and I know something you've been also thinking about and dealing with in this exhibition. Also because Iceland is particularly hard to get to if you're from the Global South, because there's not a lot of, Germans have embassies basically all over the world. So, like, you can kind of go for a visa. But Iceland has, there's 8 countries in the world that have an embassy in Iceland, basically. And, like, in the US, like, the only embassy of Iceland is in, like, Washington, D.C. So it's like if you live in LA, which is what I do, like, you have to fly to DC and apply for a visa to come to Iceland. And I told Lisa, I'm not flying to DC to come to Iceland and spending 2 weeks. So we had to find other workarounds. Like, we're basically going through the German route, both me and Orlando, I think, to get here, basically, the German embassy route.
Yeah, for sure. And this has been, a learning process, and to get to know all the restrictions and the different, also, privileged positions that different artists had as well for traveling.
And vaccinations for some of us are different and things like that,
And that has also been a big input into our group, that also we are also part of Artists in Iceland, and Hugo, Iceland is an action group. I think I skipped having I don't have humor and sugar in my overview. I apologize. I just realized when you read now. This is very important research they did with the National District of Jamaica, which is saltfish and aquifers. And during the research, they were revising and looking into how the saltfish industry in Iceland was actually established by the Danish king at the time in order to use it as a food source in the West Indies. So that's why the National Dish of Jamaica is saltfish, and actually because saltfish was used as a food source for people in enslavement. They will do a performance in April, and we're happy to invite them, and we're crossing fingers. All these processes.
Did Orlando
this time, yes. Orlando White and Rick Kamsa. And I apologize for speaking in length, and just want to touch upon some of the research projects we can let some space. And we also thought the structure of the talk would be to give a prompt, an idea for people to reflect on. And one of my prompts would just be, if you could write a note on your paper, if whatever pertains to you and sort of what has been very central to my own process in this project of revising national identity, and if it pertains to you or relates to you, Nordic exceptionalism, something that you recently discovered.
So do you want to explain this for us, because what exactly is Nordic exceptionalism, or this idea of
I think it is a term that comes from Kristin Lofsdottir, a scholar, and it's looking into exactly how the Scandinavian or the North have sort of not been able to acknowledge their involvement with imperial history and colonial forces. So this
because they take on a neutral position. They're not there, they're not here, they're literally, and that neutral position I think is very much a part of Iceland's geographic location as a body that is separate from other bodies.
Because it's an island, basically.
Yeah.
But
this also then brings up questions about the different styles and brands of Nordic exceptionalism.
Yeah. But maybe because I think I talked a little bit too long, we can have a reflection on this and write down, maybe enter into our next topic that sort of we also touch upon this unburied history.
Ask them what they want to do. I mean, it's such a small group that I think that people should interact and we should do things together.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to say that it's been like really interesting to kind of work on this, you know, and this is actually my first time in Iceland. So because of my visa problems, I couldn't actually come for the research trip, or for, you know, which is fine. Like, because my then response was, I'll just bring Pakistan into this space, and you know, very beautifully brought in like the harbor of Karachi to the harbor of Reykjavik, which felt like really meaningful to do, and it actually was like a really, like it feels very meaningful just because also growing up on a city by the ocean. And it's been really like interesting to kind of think about kind of how, so I mean, just like reading this, like, you know, I mean, I think like there's this thing about the global north and global south being super like separated from each other as like spaces of like kind of like, you know, one's future is different, one's past is different, and of course the idea that we were colonized, by which I mean South Asians, but also all other global south BIPOC communities by this supposedly global north. But one thing that I've really come to learn, and I think I'm really interested in this national identity, is of course that how even whiteness is a construction, and even spaces like Iceland were not really white, and I think now we even see this with literally currently in Europe.
What do you mean they're not really white?
They were not white in the construction of Europeanness, right? They were always the other. Like Iceland, through these travels in Iceland, what we were reading is that it kind of is this exotic, strange land, and the language being used was so similar to the way that like South Asia is being written about at the same time or around the same time by similar travelers, and this is why Richard Burton becomes like this person for us, because for him, like these are all exotic spaces.
He juxtaposed the two, Middle Eastern and Iceland together, and was sort of describing both as barbaric.
So when did here's the question: when did Iceland learn about its whiteness and white privilege? Like there had to be a moment of time where there was an understanding of what was going on outside of the island.
But I don't think you learn, I think you become, right? Like in the sense, like, I mean, I'm seeing this with Ukraine right now, like living not in Europe, is that this formation of whiteness of Ukraine suddenly, like now the discourse in the US is that Ukrainians are not Russian, they're like European, and Russians are not white, like Russians are scary, you know?
Yeah,
like,
I just came from the post-Soviet conference,
yeah.
and like we were talking about the whiteness and like how we were like the East, like what was like
to East.
We're to East, and like how we were all perceived as Russians, and like we were all like our language would sound like Russian, and now it's like Europeans are relatively civilized, relatively like with this narration, you know, like oh they are white and they like, you know, they Christian, they are relatively civilized and stuff like that, and I'm like, yeah, it's like they white but relatively in the context of the West and the Europe, and it's really interesting how they actually right now everybody like, for example, in the arts, everybody was like wants to shelter Ukrainian artists, but I'm questioning like when, like what was like where you were exhibiting Ukrainian artists before, or like, you know, when you were allowing us like, you know, to deal with the post-Soviet, and you know, like the whole like things that Latvian couldn't speak Latvian, they were not allowed. They were not allowed to speak Latvian. Lithuanians as well in schools, and this is something that like West is not talking about the East because we are all Russians. We all speak in the same accent, like really, really strong, and of course now it's like. I want to joke about it, but like, you know, I just came and like I experienced things, I witnessed things, and we are scared. We are really scared.
I have a suggestion, just to get us into this. The show and this conversation is about colonialism and in many ways imperialism, which is about power. So like power is one key word of colonialism and imperialism. I think everybody should take their Post-it note. Does everybody have one?
Nope.
Okay. Everybody get a Post-it note, get out a pen. You don't have a pen? Many pens in there.
Some people came, so I think I just need to go.
You take Post-it note? Got one? Got one? So
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that I want everybody to write. What's that? Do you need a post-it note?
Yep, can I go now?
Get a stack because we're going to use more of these.
Oh my God.
Write down for you one key word. One key word that encapsulates or represents colonialism for you. Just one word.
Okay.
And then take that key word and put it up here.
So now we're adding to the exhibition.
Very good.
Everybody's writing is so small.
Yes, I didn't know I was going to put it on the top. That's very good.
We didn't know it was going to be an art piece.
Which I'm sure we can add it to the exhibition later in some way. So what are the different words?
Maybe the one up there? Language, desolation. Who wrote desolation?
I wrote it.
What can you?
Just utter destruction and desolation are the words that came up in mind. Yeah.
Power struggle, racism, survivor, borders, oppression, theft, explorer. In quotation, you wrote that.
No, I wrote extraction.
Extraction, denial. Who did explorer in quotation? Oh, nice. Why did you put it in quotation marks?
I mean, I'm not familiar with the document that you're talking about here. I'm obviously not from here, but I think that so often those kinds of, travel journal style things and the ways in which exploration is used as a tool of oppression and power is, and positioned as, neat maps and things that we idolize.
Yeah. I mean, the word whiteness keeps on getting kind of passed around, and I've been reading a lot of writing about whiteness by Sarah Ahmed.
Yes.
And Sarah Ahmed wrote a really good book called Queer Phenomenology. And phenomenology, I hate this word because it's so annoying to say, but do folks know about this word in this history?
And this is like one of her first books that she wrote, so now it's like she's really moved on from this book.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading her phenomenological work on whiteness, but do you all know about this word, phenomenology? Yeah, it's she describes it as about orientation. How do bodies orient themselves in space? And how does that orientation depend on inheritance? So does that make sense? Does everybody know what that word orientation? How do we orient ourselves in space? Yeah? And how does that orientation depend on what we inherit from our
Does
ancestors?
orientation mean like identification? Like how you identify within?
Absolutely, identification.
But in relationship to someone else.
Yeah, there has to be a relational aspect. Your body in relation to other kinds of bodies and objects in space.
Right.
Like
And
we are gay because you're straight kind of thing, right? Like that's the idea.
how do you know I'm straight?
No, I'm just saying, not you, not you, not you the human, you the general. Or like I'm Pakistani because there is an Indian. Kind of, that's better.
Exactly. Is that?
Right.
Yeah. So these words up here, in a way, they're keywords about colonialism based on our specific orientation and what we've inherited. And we could probably do this again and really go deeper into that.
I also want to, it's interesting to me that everyone had a different word. I actually thought someone would say extraction.
Yeah, I also thought about it, but
but it's interesting.
I just want, I was gonna do something else, but I improvised. But I could share something else about my orientation, and then I have, okay. John, can you go there? Oh, it's over here. Yeah. And this doesn't really this image doesn't really relate directly to this particular exhibition. I mean, it's about my own identity, and I thought that I might bring it up to maybe think about how your specific identities relate to what's going on in this room and all the nuance that is sort of in that space. So so from 1940 to 1945, my German family, they were imprisoned in concentration camps for being Jewish. And at that time, Jews were not considered white. And after the Holocaust, Germany established an official system of restitution. Do you all know what that word is, restitution? Yeah?
Not in that context. I mean, maybe now in the Jewish context, with the arts happening now with some African countries asking European countries to restitute their arts.
Yes.
I think that's the idea. I don't know.
Restitute.
Like returning, right?
Returning, or making some kind of gesture as a reparative gesture.
Like reparations as well. So restitution and reparations, right?
Yes. But restitution and reparations, there's more nuance there that we that we should talk about. Keep on thinking about it. But so this document is a document that my great-grandmother filled out. Germany had an official system of restitution that they established that says, we committed this crime against humanity, and now we are going to pay you money as a reparative gesture. And this form is just like a basic form that you have to start your restitution file. So you want to get the restitution payment, you have to go. At the time she was in New York, living with my grandmother, and she went to a lawyer and they gave her this form and she filled it out. And she included her name, birth date, place of birth, basic information. But the area highlighted in red, what is the Germans here know what this word is? What is this word?
What's the English word? It's like
nationality, citizenship. And look what my great-grandmother did on that document. She filled out everything, but in that particular bracket, she left it blank because she didn't have citizenship. Her citizenship was revoked. And I like looking at images like this because they, of course, teach me about my own identity, but like what's going on in the show, there's literally a bunch of very nuanced, small marks in that space, small gestures that teach about particular orientations of individuals dealing with colonialism. And in this area here, for me, this is my, you keep on using this word nuanced gesture, or nuanced surface. This is a document that has a nuanced surface that teaches me about my relationship to citizenship, for example. So, I mean, you all know these questions. But in this case, like this is an archival document. How do archives work to write history? How do archives work to write history, and what histories are buried, forgotten, or covered up? Like, nobody in my family taught me about this. I had to find this document. My mom doesn't know about this history. I'm not even sure my grandmother was sort of cued into the kind of relentless bureaucracy that my great-grandmother had to go through. And over time, folks find these documents and bring them to the surface and start trying to make sense of them. We did this here in Iceland with these documents that the Minister of Justice held to create Iceland's first border surveillance. So can you go to the next slide? We're going to do another activity. Okay, so write down an element of your identity. This is building off this over here. Write down an element of your identity, your family history that you realize was buried, forgotten, or covered up. And you're not going to share this. You're not going to share this, so keep that in mind. You don't, okay? You're going to share something else. Okay, can you go to the next? There's a next.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry, yeah.
No?
No.
It's all right.
Yeah.
So take this. Does everybody have their thing? You don't have a thing?
Yeah.
You have a thing? Okay. Take your thing and make one, like this, make one key word that represents that thing that you wrote down that was buried, forgotten, or covered up.
I did only write one word.
You only wrote one word?
Oh, kind
Amazing.
of.
Now, when you're done, put your word back up there.
Do we have more posting?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I have one more?
Oh! There you go. I mean, I already said what mine is, citizenship. I'll put that up there. You have one?
Yeah, can I have one?
But these are confidential. I'm not sure.
This is all I wanted to do. I don't know, a lot of this stuff is like, I think the other day I used the word actualized. It's like things become actualized when you write it down or say it out in space. And it really becomes actualized when other people see what you say, or hear what you say, see what you say, or hear what you say. So, this is all I wanted to do. Does anybody want to share what they wrote down? Don't have to.
I mean, I wrote language.
You wrote language?
Yeah.
I also wrote language.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing that I kind of lost a little bit. I don't know how it began, but I did some courses to get it back, but it's quite complicated.
What language did you lose?
My mother tongue, I mean, I understand it, but I can't speak it fluently, and I'm kind of sad about that.
What is your mother tongue?
It's called Malumba, and it's from the western part of Cameroon, from where I originate from, and I kind of lost that. But I'm still happy that my parents kind of forced that on us so I could learn, because it's beautiful. So so I think that's the one thing that I lose the most. But I mean, the tradition we still kept it, so I'm happy about that.
Have you ever talked to your family about the loss and like?
Oh yeah.
What are you talking about?
They felt bad, mostly my parents. And
Did they give it to you? Did they pass it down to you?
Yeah, because most of the time they were discussing about that, like it's between them and everything. And my dad felt so bad that he sent us to the school to learn about the language, at least the culture.
Yeah.
So we know the culture, we know the tradition, the faith behind and everything, but the language, we know the basics. I mean, for me, I speak for myself because my sisters they're quite, they learn much more than me. So yeah, I think I will try my best until I learn all of it. So yeah.
I mean, my mom has 2 full German parents that spoke thick German English accents around me, and my mom doesn't speak one word of German. Not only that, she despises the language because of what it represents.
I have the same thing with language, and it's really much more complicated because the language that it's like my native indigenous language. It's like called Mimi, and it's like a mixture of Sindhi and Gujarati because my people are from this kind of transition belt between the two, and it's not a written tongue. It's an oral tongue only, it's only oral because we all would write Gujarati, not we but my grandparents, and then of course when Pakistan became Pakistan, when we all moved, we only could write and read. Well, not only could, but the education was then in Urdu. So it's really interesting because my grandmother can't read or write Urdu or English, and she can write and read Gujarati, and she speaks fluent Mimi, but she speaks fluent Urdu as well, but she can't read or write it. And I can understand Mimi, which is her tongue. I can't read any Gujarati, but I can read and write Urdu and English. And so it's this weird, but it's a loss because somehow after because I will never speak it to my children, maybe, so it's the last kind of generation of people who are going to pass it away, and it's kind of fascinating that that's happening. So also if a language has never been written, how do you preserve it? It's because there is no written script of maybe, or there's no literature, there's no written literature. So
what is the way to preserve it?
I mean, ideally you would just speak it, and then you would keep on passing it down, right? So that's why I can understand, because it is spoken in the house by my grandmother to her siblings and to my parents. So it's interesting because even in this one conversation, my parents would reply to her in Mimi, but then reply to us in Urdu, or English. It's so interesting.
Would anybody else like to share the word that they wrote down?
I wrote dialect, which relates to language. Because I don't know, it has to be something hidden within my family. Because I grew up speaking Spanish, and my mother also, but she comes from a state called Puebla, and then there's a lot of indigenous communities there. And at some point, the French came to that region.
Do you know
and
what
then
year?
Everything got mixed.
Do you know about what year?
I have no idea. That's also something I don't know about. I don't really know anybody from my father's family, so I don't know the history of my father's family, and most of the history, before my grandmother, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
So what I've heard at some point is that my grandfather from my mother's side was indigenous, while my grandmother from my mother's side also, the mother of the family of the mother of my mother was French. So I don't really know, I don't know anything. So I guess the language would be, or the dialects were, or I don't know. It's just that's also a matter of discussion to me, what is a dialect, what is the language? Because sometimes we consider dialects below in the hierarchy of a language, or I don't know, that's my kind of perception. And also in the area where I grew up in Veracruz, like there is a lot of like communities, and I don't speak any of that, like Nahuatl, and a lot of the names of cities and places, and you know, they're in Nahuatl. So, and I do not relate to anything. And then this is a different kind of pronunciation and everything. But it actually, what was interesting to me is when I moved to Iceland, they have these like, you know, they have all these like sounds that I could do because I have that from all these like pronunciations in Nahuatl that we have.
Interesting.
So, you know, like saying Ella felt like you could at some point to me
Wow.
isn't that
Yes, exactly.
Wait, what did you say? Like is the volcano's name. You know?
It's the volcano name that newscasters couldn't say when it blew up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I had to learn how to say it, but of course, because I have these kind of like, I have developed my, you know, my tongue and you know my mouth in a way I could relate to that.
It's to go back to what we were talking about phenomenology and orientation being wrapped up in inheritance. You inherited a language in your body that you're using now, but just in a way that is making you orient to this space.
Right. And well, besides that, I mean, that's my that was my work, but I want to go back to what you mentioned, like how could a language could be preserved if it's not written. I was doing a piece like Julius created this exhibition with Claire, and we were all interpreting, you know, different pieces. And I worked with this woman from with Innocencia. Sorry, she is from Ghana, and she speaks Iwi. I think it's pronounced that way. So I went to, you know, I was reading about like the language, and then at some point I touched upon, because she was singing a song, and then I wanted to know the meaning of the song, and then I went to a research on how some African cultures preserve the language through movement, rhythm, music, because they did not have the technology or the kind of technology that helped like a written material to be preserved, because they did not have the sources or anything. But they have these other sources which are like, you know, is equal, you know, it's not that something is more than other, but like they have this other like a way of preserving, which is like dance and music and rhythm. And to me that was so interesting, because it speaks of what they have at the moment, which is like this like worldview on like music and, you know, body language and everything. Yeah. So I think to me that would be one of the ways, you know, that is so important. And also, you know, I can relate that to where I come from, that a lot of the narratives is passed through the lyrics of music, through the, you know, the chants and everything, or gathering together and do these folklore dances in the streets. So it happens through that, like the legends, the myths, you know, all that happens to that. And that is how, I mean, later on you take it and you write it, no? Because we have Spanish as a language, but then, you know, that's a way of preserving that, like orally. Like,
I just want to connect, and then we'll move on to Viola, because we've got to go. But has anybody read this book called Discourse on Colonialism by Amy Césaire? It's a really beautiful book. He's a French Mauritian poet scholar who was very active in like the 30s in this movement. Folks know about it. But there's this, in the book he uses this beautiful figurative called machine of forgetting. That colonialism is about a machine of forgetting that just churns people into passive conformance. And, you know, like in this example here, it's like my mom doesn't speak her mother tongue. You know, you both are talking about the erasure of your mother tongue, and that is a part of the machine of forgetting that runs colonialism, makes it operate, and sustains it.
actually to read a legend from Hutulsul, which is like it's one of the parts in Ukraine. It's like the mountains, and it's about the Ruhr, and it's regarding kind of my kind of thing, because I kind of my participation here is about why I'm here is because I did this project about migration plants and how people are taking very often seeds and some plants that remind them home. And Ruhr, it's a healing herb. It has a lot of vitamin C. And yeah, and the legend was translated from Ukrainian by Anna Migunova, that she came from Kharkiv, and I met her in Dortmund. The Hutsul carver, Master Louis Verbenchuk, had a wonderful daughter, Anichka. The old man was a widower, afraid to marry daughter in other village and be completely alone. And the daughter, as luck would have it, fell in love with the lad Vasily, who was a good violinist from the neighboring village. So they began to meet in the mountains when the evening came. One day the old master followed his daughter and he saw her with Vasily. The master came out of his hiding place behind a large stone and went straight to the young people, saying, "Is that how you, my daughter, honor your father? That is how you comfort his old heart? Well, both of you know that I will never give my only daughter my last hope to music." The girl was frightened and ran down the steep slope away from her angry father. Vasily ran after Anichka, who was already reaching the step precipice. He shouted that it was very steep and dangerous ahead, but it was too late. Small stones slipped under the girl's feet, and she flew into the abyss like a white bird. The mountains picked up Vasily's cry and seemed to sigh deeply. It's step, it's step, it's step. And in Ukrainian it sounds, it's like tam kruto, and the name of the herb is ruta. Out of the grief, the old master abandoned his craft and soon died. And Vasily completely lost his mind. Shabby and straight-haired, he wandered the mountains, played the old violin and whispered, "My Ruto, fragrant Ruto, where are you, Ruto? Mountains know, but I don't know. Tell me, high mountains, where did you shout, Ruto, Ruto? You called my Anichka and took it from me. Gave it back to me. Do you hear? Give it back." One day he stopped, and at the place where he had last met Anichka, and saw a green bush that was just beginning to bloom, spreading deadly aromas around. He sat down on a fluttered stone and played the violin, plaintively. Sprouts became sad, the birds stopped making sounds, singing, and the mountain seems to sigh, and a familiar voice was heard in the side. "Don't be sad, my lad. Pluck this wheat, boil it and then drink. You will forget Anichka. If you drink again, you will regain your mind, and you will be happy. And the third time you drink the potion, you won't look into that direction." The voice felt silent. The violin also felt silent. Vasily's clouded mind seemed to be enlightened by the voice. The lad plucked leaves from that green bush and did as all his native and familiar voices advised. He drank 3 times a potion of the leaves and forgot everything. Anichka, even dead, wished her beloved happiness. He only remembered the word Ruta. And Vasily thought that was probably the name of the green bush. Since then, people have been left with this name and legend that tells of their happy love and the healing fragrance of Ruta. And we actually, I'm coming. I was in Poland And we read this legend before we actually planted ruta and other Ukrainian healing herbs with a group of refugees from Ukraine. And that's the only thing that I wanted to say. And also I came with seeds, with arnica. I came with arnica. Yes, I have them. I have it somewhere in my bag. And it's also one of the healing herbs that is also used in the folklore medicine in Ukraine. And it also symbolizes the sun in alchemists. So yeah.
So do they drink it in tea or do they
They
chew
very
it or?
often, like with arnica, there's different ways, but like with ruta, they drink it in tea. Like they making like this, they boil it for some time, and then you can just like leave it, and then like you drink it as a potion.
Yeah.
And it's full of vitamin C. It's really good. And arnica was also used in Ukraine to heal really hard wounds to heal. Yeah, and there's of course plenty other herbs.
Right.
Can you talk about the project that you're going to work on, that where you were having to get permission to have these antidote gardens?
Yeah, so basically there was this one part that right now we were just like plant like the herbs in the pots, because we didn't got the permission from the city yet to actually create like a healing garden that we're going to create in collaboration with our newcomers to Poland from Ukraine. We're going to do like a picnic with families, both the newcomers and the people, local people, that they're living in the town of Torun, and we want to plant the herbs together that they can, then they can harvest and use. So,
That's beautiful. I think it's important. It's like all of this stuff is so depressing and numbing and anxiety inducing. And I like this story and I like your project because it's an antidote to the violence that is created by colonialism and imperialism.
yeah,
And if you don't have an antidote, there is not going to be a future.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, and I would love to. We will also going to hear more on this tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So at 3, 2 o'clock, something like that, right? We start at 2 o'clock and it's until 6 o'clock with the PT as well. And I think it would be good maybe for us to transition to the next.
And everything that you guys have said I've taken, because this is perfect, I feel like.
What?
Like all the different things that you've talked about, I feel like with Zara's conversation, I feel like
Right,
it's
yes.
like a great bridge into that.
Yeah, I feel it's not good.
So, we can talk. So you said you wanted to do a coffee break while we transition, right? That's what's
I would like to suggest that people want to start, have a coffee, and we will arrange this evening a little bit differently because we will be introduced to Sarah here on the screen. And yeah.
So in 15 minutes, because I think we just want to set up, right?
Right.
Okay.
Sound like this, if that sounds good with everybody? Yes. Thank you so much, everybody. It was very fun having you.
But you should thank them.
And thank you. today we have a talk.
Or more of a conversation.
Conversation, yes. I'm so formal, I've learned now. Conversation with Sarah Mechanics. He's an artist in the exhibition, invited by the Manhattan Tiger, and her very impactful, beautiful audio piece, Oceanic Feelings, which they will speak about. Ansis will as well touch upon a little bit about the Hydra's contribution to the exhibition, and today, as you've seen, you have in your hands the new publication by the collective, but we work for, just a new addition to it, but this is collective has been working since 2015 and work very much in terms of publication and sort of like fluid contributions, or performative publications, they termed it as well. But Asis will also maybe touch upon a little bit the practice of our collective, and we will maybe also show a small fraction of the video essay that we also launched that's now in our exhibition in relation to the publication.
Zara, can you hear us? Are you there? I have no idea how this works. I'm very intrigued by all the beautiful. Hi. Amazing. But no, it's not going to the speaker, so let's connect.
Sorry, now we have to make one adjustment to the technical aspects of this.
Yeah,
if everything's going to behave this time.
Are they on? No, I think it's going to be plugged in now.
Yeah,
they're Zara, will you talk?
Absolutely.
Do you hear us?
I hear you. But there is a technical. Yeah, it's between what I hear and what I see.
You hear and you see? No.
Okay, no, now I can hear and see the same thing, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Amazing.
The time structure has fixed itself.
But perhaps for now, oh yeah, this is good because then you can see the crowd as well a little bit. Okay, cool. Hi everyone. I'm so delighted to actually, I'm so sorry Zara can't be here, is not here in person, but I'm very happy that Zara is with us and in the exhibition. And actually it's very weird because we've been thinking, we've known each other now for almost 10 years, Zara and I. We've been friends and collaborators, well, collaborators in this way, but really friends for 10 years, since 2013. So I'm Aziz Sohail. I am one-fourth of the collective, Many-Headed Hydra. And the thing is, it's really hard to say because the Many-Headed Hydra as a collective, we grow and we we expand and we contract, depending, because you know the legend is that if you used to cut one head of the Hydra, two heads would grow. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of really beautiful because if you think of ideas like anti-fascist, anti-racist, collectivized work, you can never cut us down, you can never really destroy us. And also, you know, the collective was started by Emma Wolf-Haw and Suza Huse, who are artists and curators. And Suza is from Germany, Emma is from Ireland, but they're both based in Berlin. And I think it was really started to think of the oceanic as an analytic and kind of think of the ways in which bodies of water connect us, and kind of the fluidity of those relationships. And the first magazine, which there is a copy of that first magazine, right? We could maybe show it that as well. But the first magazine was called Sea Body Infrastructure, and it was launched in 2015. And again, it was built and made in collectivity. And today, I guess we're here with Many-Headed Hydra magazine number 5, so we've come a long way. 5 magazines, and now Disa and I have been invited to be, as we say, core caretakers of the collective. So again, 4 people in the collective doesn't mean that it's just 4 people. It can become 100 people. It can be, you know, just 10 people. And I guess for this project and exhibition, we basically are 6 people, which includes Pia Arke and Zara Malkani, who's with us today. So again, just a little bit, when Disa invited us to do this exhibition project, I had just kind of started collaborating with Emma and Suza. They had come to Pakistan in 2019, and also gone to Colombo in 2019, where we first met. And by this time, I started thinking of this idea of the global north and the global south, not as like kind of super separated spaces, but as intertwined spaces in terms of their past, their present, and their future, and their desire. And unfortunately, I couldn't come to Iceland for the research component of the exhibition, which Emma and Susa were able to come for. And when they came here, they went to Finnafjordur, right, which is a village, a site. You have to, if I don't know anything specific, you have to explain. It's in the northeast of Iceland.
Right. It is a fjord that is sort of positioned between two towns, right? Vatnafjörður and Raufarhöfn, and it is being now in the developmental phase of building of an industrial harbour that will only become profitable in the next 50 years when the ice is melted. So that's kind of the prophecy of the whole area. But it's the Icelandic government in collaboration with the German Brennenport, GmbH.
And of course, that makes really is intense for Emma and Susa because they're based in Berlin. So of course, the German entanglement in this capitalism is really important.
Yeah. So I mean, they expected to start the building of the harbour in 2022. As of now, it's not started. When we were traveling there and having conversations with locals and getting sort of the understanding of the process, it is still a question mark. So, but it's in the plans.
And so when they talked about this harbor, I was starting to think about the harbor, like in Karachi, where I'm from, which is on the coast of Pakistan. There is also, and that's how Zara comes in, and we talk about some of this, but there is a harbor being built in, Karachi. The harbor in Karachi is actually being expanded as we speak, and it's kind of interesting to actually live in Karachi and to grow and to literally go back every year and actually see the sea being pushed back, like actually, like, you know, continuously happening, and the sand being added and reclamation being done. And there's another harbor being built in Gwadar, which is much more west, much closer to the Iranian border in Pakistan, which is, and again, this will be this harbor of the future, but it's like the centerpiece of Chinese kind of investment of the Silk and something Belt Route, whatever it's called, and of course it's being built with a lot of Chinese debt and Pakistan, and it will kind of allow China to, I guess, take all this oil and stuff from the Middle East and then kind of ship it through like pipelines and kind of trucks through Pakistan into China, which of course also in the Chinese element includes kind of then taking over Tibet and kind of creating, you know, because it have to go through Tibet. But I mean, for this, I just started thinking about like how horrific it is that these places are building these harbors, you know, for these long-term profitable margins, where like this, I guess 50 years from now, this harbor in Finnafjordur will be profitable when there is no ice cap. And somehow, of course, it also is prophesying that there will be a world in which there will be like ice melt, and the ships that will pass through this harbor will also contribute to that. And in the same way, the Chinese investment in Pakistan is also this 50-year prophecy. And of course, being a queer collective and thinking through queerness, it's, you know, really important to us to, for me to think of failure. I'm like, but I mean, these are all meant to fail. I mean, the world will end, you know, climate change is actually happening and people will be dying and not being able to live. And so I guess this idea was that like, okay, how can we kind of think of this future? And because again, Lisa's jumping off point for this exhibition was his Travels in Iceland book, so much of this contemporary capitalism that we live in is very much linked to this figure of this traveler who would go to these places and kind of create these ideas of colonization and kind of what resources must be extracted. Literally, like, you know, Richard Burton and explorers came to the port or like to the villages of Karachi and told the British that this is the best place to build a port because, like, you know, this is where there's no gales and this is where, you know, there's not going to be a hurricane and things like that. So literally we are all entangled in the history of these colonial kind of travelers. So our response to this exhibition has been much less kind of directly dealing with travels in Iceland, but kind of thinking of this larger history of traveling, and I think also offering kind of oracles to the future, both of collapse. So we really embrace the fact that there is a literal destruction and collapse and erasure happening, but also hopefully hope and future and kind of preservation. And I love Zara. I was just telling Zara, and we were like, oh my God, we both noted it down. I love that Eric talked about the machine of forgetting, because very much on the coast of Karachi, Sindh and Balochistan, there are long-term indigenous communities who have their own songs and languages and histories who are actively resisting. There is a deep, beautiful, strong, powerful resistance movement to all of this, which is also being brutally suppressed. And in some way, working with Zara, Zara has been kind of doing this, you use the word autoethnography, right? But I don't know if the word is, also because I know you are both Sindhi and Baloch, or kind of in terms of ethnicity and kind of nationality, but I don't know if you're doing autoethnography, but you're kind of really traveling these spaces and kind of working with these communities and things like that. But today's thing is I was in conversation with Zara to kind of think of some of this history, and then after this we will launch officially the Many-Headed Hydra zine and kind of think a little bit about where that is, and then this will lead us into we wanted to go into the space after that, look at our kind of exhibition within an exhibition together. So as a Hydra, we also work as a curatorial artistic collective. I purely identify as a curator, so that my gesture was inviting Zara as an artist into this space, whereas Emma and Suza, Emma created new works, and everyone kind of works differently in the collective. And then after this, we'll engage with Lakaluk, right, from Greenland.
Right, we will most likely screen one of her performances online. Unfortunately, because of personal reasons, she might not be present with us today.
Okay.
But we will screen one of her very,
And we can read poems from her.
Right.
Yeah, so Lakaluk is also in the zine, and we can kind of think a little about the indigenous kind of communities of the Indian Ocean belt, and kind of how we're trying to also build this relationship to Greenland and to Iceland, and to kind of, again, trying to intertwine these, what at first glance for communities might be these very separate, very far away places, but we, of course, want to kind of find a way to bridge them, and kind of, but in much more nuanced ways than just global north, global south, but actually much more thinking through shared histories and conversations.
Maybe add to that, that port that is going to be built in Finnefer, there is also not meant just to be for industrial shipping, but also to work on the natural resources that might be extracted from Greenland. So it would be this kind of center for working or manufacturing those resources from there. So it's also quite good.
And of course it makes, for us, it's also deeply important to just know that we are in a building that is called the Marshall House. Shocking to me, just in the sense that I was just talking with Vera about how being from Pakistan, which has strategically totally aligned itself with China, and now for obviously very strategic reasons, and there is this fear of China in the global north, right, or in the west, but kind of we're literally living in a place, or looking in a place that was rebuilt through massive American money. And I think that kind of history is never talked about these strategic alignments that places do, and we are in literally the Marshall House, the harbor, and the NATO base in Iceland. So as you said, supposedly a neutral island with lots of American money in it, so whatever that means. And I'm also struck by that in this, of course, very contemporary moment of being in Europe with the war, about what is neutrality and what is strategic positioning that we all do, and what does it mean to become from a nation in that way. I think none of us here believe in nation states, I don't, but I guess we're all linked through nation states. But over to you, Zara. I don't know if you wanna, I know you and I said that we would discuss a bit about how we started our collaboration, but also just, I can officially introduce you if you want.
Will you introduce me, or should I introduce myself?
Whatever you want, but I can just say that Zara, I don't like to read out these bios, but I can just say that Zara is an artist, writer, researcher. Again, as I said, I've known her for 10 years. A lot of us moved back to Karachi around 2013, 2014 from our respective undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees in the world. I was at college in Boston area at Brandeis University. Zara was at Goldsmiths. And there are many of our other friends. Many of us are, queer and kind of thinking of this in this world in different ways. And we were like, what is happening when we moved to Karachi? Because it was really like a very specific type of art scene. And I think we were all kind of shocked by this art scene. And we all started meeting in the city at different sites, at the beach, at the planetarium, in different parks, in the railroad area. There's all these histories, and kind of started thinking of the city that we were a part of, and and all of us are from Karachi, so a lot of us were fully from Karachi, like our parents and grandparents have been there since 1947. And since then, Zara has been doing, I'm giving such an in-person bio, but I feel like it's actually your bio, where like in 2015 with Shahana Rajani, who's also a very good friend of ours, Zara started this project called Karachi La Jamia, or in English, Karachi Art Anti-University, which was, I know there was a particular trigger point for that starting as well, which I don't know if you want me to talk about, but it was really much about an exhibition of yours in Shahana getting shut down as well, right? Which kind of was looking at missing people from Balochistan, which the exhibition was looking at different kind of ways of the representation of the city, but it included a component of Baloch communities being, so what's happening in Pakistan is a lot of the people who are from Balochistan, which is the largest province of Pakistan, 50% of the Pakistani land, but only 10% of Pakistan's or 5% of Pakistan's population. It's like the jewel in the crown of Chinese investment, because it has lots of copper and gold and gas and oil and I don't even know, many things. And it's being totally kind of something the Pakistani state wants to kind of put in its orbit. There's a deep resistance to it. And of course, one of the ways that the Pakistani government responds is by literally overnight disappearing Baloch writers, activists, thinkers, leftist intellectuals. And so there was a component of, and this is one of the red lines in Pakistani politics, like actually this is a red line, like people have been killed for hosting a talk, around Balochistan as well. And so I think it's like a really deep kind of topic, and so this exhibition was shut down, but anyways, Shahana and Zara then kind of started doing this amazing project which has kind of been evolving and kind of fluidly moving. And then with the Many-Headed Hydra, we've been working on this 2-year project looking at building queer infrastructures of art in South Asia, specifically Colombo and Karachi, and connecting them to post-migrant positions in Berlin. And we invited Zara and Shahana to like do this workshop with Karachi art residents on ecologies and watery kind of bodies and the oceanic spaces in Karachi where there is active resistance happening. Zara also is otherwise a very lovely artist who's also exploring oceanic histories and indigenous kind of plant making and ecologies in Sindh, and currently she's a resident at Academy Schloss Solitude in Stuttgart, which is where you're joining us from, where apparently there's a big storm. There's also a storm here, so over to you, Zara.
Yeah, thank you, Aziz, for a very comprehensive introduction. Yes, as Aziz said, I'm an artist. I'm mostly based in Karachi. I've been based in Karachi for a very long time now. But these days I am in Germany, in Stuttgart, at the Academy Schloss Solitude, where it is very snowy and a very alien landscape for me. But yes, I am a multidisciplinary artist. I often work collaboratively and most often with my collaborator Shahana Rajani. My work is research-based and it explores infrastructure, development and militarism in Karachi and beyond, and increasingly now in the southern coastal region of Pakistan. And yeah, as Aziz said, I think when Aziz and I kind of first connected with each other was in the kind of earlier stages of my practice, and it was at a time, a very specific historical moment in Karachi, where in the early 2010s, Karachi was increasingly in global and national media being cast and represented as one of the most dangerous cities in the world, as a city kind of rife with violence and the kind of potentiality of terror, as a city that had kind of these no-go zones and red zones where terrorists lurked. Of course, this also kind of implicated Karachi as a really central node and a central site for the global war on terror at the time. I think this was a period of time where some of us, including Aziz and myself, had moved back to Karachi, including my collaborator Shahana Rajani, and it was the time where we were really kind of trying to renegotiate our relationship with the city, in a time when the city was constantly being cast as a violent site, and a site to kind of, be cautious and fearful and careful in. And we were really thinking about how could we negotiate and navigate, and also as artists represent and speak of this city in other ways. We were very aware that this narrative of Karachi being a dangerous city was a narrative that was being deployed to militarize it and to securitize it. And we were thinking in our art practices, but also in the ways that we moved through the city and connected with each other in the city, how do we resist that narrative, or how do we think otherwise? So that was kind of the larger political backdrop against which we were doing this, but also on some level, on a very personal level, it was also about, for me as a woman, and also a woman with a certain extent of class privilege, how do I was also in that sense trying to renegotiate my relationship with the city and public space and the politics of the city. So this was really the beginning stages of the trajectory of my practice as it is today, which is increasingly now concerned with the politics of infrastructure and development and the infrastructural violence and the military development nexus in Pakistan, but especially how it manifests in the southern coastal region of Pakistan now. And the project Oceanic Feelings that is being showcased in this exhibition is a more recent piece and an ongoing piece. It's still very much in flux and developing and evolving, and still trying to figure out what exactly it is and what it could become. And yeah, it's almost in some ways it's kind of an accidental project as well. So I think we'll be getting into that, but I'll hand it back over to you, Aziz.
Thanks. And Zara, perhaps this is maybe a good time. So we're keeping it very, because Zara and I have been in many conversations, so we have talking points, but we also, of course, the piece is in this space, and we thought after this we could kind of go and kind of hang out there, and also the video I know is there, but perhaps Zara, this is a good time for us to maybe just mark it, maybe listen to the first episode, very first kind of piece, right, which is how to learn Baloch language, right, or like learn. And
should I begin by just giving a bit of an introduction to the work and the process, or should we?
I think let's listen to it and then let's do the introduction. Yeah, just to get the voices in the room.
Let me do a screen share. Oh, screen sharing is disabled.
You have to give her host access. We'll just give you host access, or co-host access.
There you go.
I think it should work now.
Zerwan Tiab Karking Mied Buji Yakdor Nangar Mohig Tagas Madag Lujar Tatar Sol Ker Pashant Petan Shirmohi Sakan Gelwaruk Kon Shong Katel Tushuk Peshek Pagos Obrar. Sea, Zer. This sea is deep and very cold. Yezer Jubilant O Sat Sortent.
Radio Darya. I'll stop there. Or was it too soon to stop?
I think this is beautiful, huh? I think this is good. And I think this is a good time. We can do an introduction now.
Okay. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you actually, because everyone here does have the magazine, and if you actually flip to page number 24, you can actually see like a description of oceanic feelings and also in the track list. So this is the first track list in oceanic feelings number 1.
24?
Page 24, 25. All right, Zara, go first, sorry.
So that was the first few minutes of the very first mix I made as part of Oceanic Feelings, and I guess in some ways it's kind of one of the early stages in this project evolving to what it is now becoming. And what you hear in the beginning is the sound of a tutorial of Balochi language. And it is what you're being taught in that moment is the Balochi words for different types of fish, different types of boats, and different types of bodies of water. And following that is a song by a very well-known singer from the neighborhood of Liari in Karachi, Yunus Jani. And he's speaking of, in the song, he's speaking of Deva, and Deva is a musical tradition, a kind of Indian Ocean musical tradition that you mostly find in Pakistan. You mostly find it in Balochistan and in Baloch neighborhoods of Karachi. But it's a musical tradition that traveled across the Indian Ocean and in Pakistan has influences from and really, really deep and ancient connections with the different Indian Ocean regions, from Zanzibar and Tanzania to Iran and Oman and Muscat. So yes, he's singing of Leva in that moment. But I'll just kind of take a few steps back to just talk about oceanic feelings in general. As I said earlier, my work has mostly been about exploring the politics of infrastructure in Pakistan and thinking through infrastructural and environmental violence in Pakistan and the ways in which infrastructure is increasingly cast as a nationalist project, and with specific communities then being cast as anti-national and outside of the interests of the nationalist project. And those communities, of course, are the communities where these infrastructural projects are built and the communities that are being devastated by this kind of infrastructural development. So to begin with, mostly this work I was doing in Karachi itself, but increasingly over the past few years I started moving beyond Karachi, and over a period of time I was spending time across the coastal belt of Karachi in sites of infrastructural violence with the new kind of emerging port infrastructural development that's happening. And in that period of time, I increasingly started moving towards, as kind of in my research practice, I increasingly started moving towards recording sound as one of my methods of documentation, because of the ways in which sometimes sound feels less visible and less invasive in securitized regions than pulling out a camera or even carrying a camera with you. So I increasingly started moving somewhat inadvertently towards documenting through sound, and at some point started to realize that I was building a big body of sonic research And around the same time, so that's one of the pathways through which this project emerges. But I think, as Aziz mentioned, it also goes much further back to my own experience in Pakistan and thinking about what my friend Saima Tariq calls the sonic hegemonies of Pakistan. And we have a really famous kind of somewhat famous musical series in Pakistan called Coke Studio, which describes itself as the sound of the nation. And it's not inaccurate in some ways as in describing itself as a sound of the nation, because it is quite specific in its sonic landscape, where certain languages and certain ethnicities and certain regions' traditions are being represented sonically in the mainstream music of Pakistan, and other ethnicities and traditions and languages are completely absent. And because of my relationship with, because of my own ethnicity, and because of my own experiences growing up, I really felt the absence of the sonic landscape that I grew up with in mainstream Pakistani music. And even in so many of the communities that I moved around in, and their knowledge of Pakistani music. So these were kind of the two thoughts that were existing at the same time as this project was emerging. And around the same period of time, I was thinking about how specific ethnicities and communities in Pakistan are cast as outside of the interests of the nationalist project, and how much these infrastructural, this kind of military development nexus that you see in these regions, where securitization and development happens together in incredibly violent ways, and how much we're seeing that across the coast of Pakistan. I was thinking about how, in that sense, infrastructure and development kind of becomes like a border building and border reinforcing project that increasingly sets communities outside of the borders of the imagined borders of Pakistan. And I became interested in, on the one hand, kind of thinking about the oceanic histories of Pakistan and how much this kind of history of oceanic exchange that you witness in the coastal regions and coastal communities of Pakistan is not part of how Pakistan, the Pakistani state wants Pakistan to be understood or imagined. And at the same time, I kind of started thinking about how much of this music and the sonic landscape that I was recording and encountering and what had already been in relation with, how much of it was part of mystical and devotional practices. And I was thinking about the kind of relationship between the mystical and devotional practices as practices of healing from the violence of these processes, but also these mystical and devotional practices as practices of connection and relation with great radical potential. And so I started thinking about this idea of oceanic feeling. Oceanic feeling refers to that mystical experience, or that mystical state in which, that ultimate kind of mystical ecstatic experience in which you feel your own boundaries dissolve, in which you experience a kind of ego death or self-annihilation, and you experience the feeling of absolute oneness with the universe or with God. And so in that sense, the mystical experience is a practice, is a border-breaking experience. And I thought that was an interesting node to pursue because of the ways in which these oceanic communities and their sonic traditions also do the work of breaking and undoing and transgressing the borders that the Pakistani state imagines and reinforces in these regions. And so that's kind of where this work emerges from. And also just, it kind of came together inadvertently in that I had all of this sound, and I was really interested always in music, and I was at some point approached by a friend who asked me to make a mix for a project of theirs, and that's when I started thinking of these field recordings that I had as something that I could work with, and so far I've made three mixes altogether, and I'm still kind of working with these sounds and continuing to encounter them and think through them and think about, how I could work with them in the future as well. I think I'll stop there.
No, this is very great, and I just want to kind of add that, of course, the invitation to Zara to be a part of the exhibition here, again, like it felt kind of perfect to be at this port facing the Arctic Sea, or I mean the kind of, and I don't know, I just kind of think about this because I think growing up in Pakistan, and Zara, maybe you have the same experience, like, you know, like, I remember being in like 5th grade geography or something, and then like they're like, what is the land of the midnight sun? And then we're like, it's Iceland. And then it's like, and you know, like this imagination of Iceland, I think for like us in the tropics, literally, you know, in this like was like completely not understandable. Like, how do you even like conceive of a land? And you know, today is the big first day of Ramzan, like Ramadan, the Muslim holy month. As well, and it's actually kind of beautiful that we're starting. But you know, I even think about this. I've been talking about this with Disa as well. That like in Islam, like in Ramzan, like you have to fast from sunrise to sunset. So like the whole day is built around like a setting sun and a rising sun. And what happens in a land when there is no setting sun and there's no rising sun for like, you know, 3 months of the year kind of a situation. And also then I've been thinking a lot about, again, communities of color that do come to a place like Iceland and kind of experience this space in such a different way than what they would have, you know, just like the sun and the heat. So kind of thinking of oceanic feelings, it kind of was like, I was like, what did it mean to have these like deep Sindh and Balochistan oceanic feelings when you're looking at this space and kind of seeking it out. And I think that's what we wanted to do, also create like a really deep listening space as well. And Zara, I guess my question to you in that was also like, how much do you see this as like kind of, because you're kind of talking about these sonic hegemonies and kind of the listening, and of course, like one of the things is also that now the camera is a very suspect thing in a place like the oceanic areas of Karachi and Sindh and Balochistan because of surveillance and kind of this idea of like development and kind of like who's watching whom. But I mean, how do you think of this as also a project which is like somehow transnational and kind of ecologically kind of in conversation with other similar kind of conversations that are happening in other spaces like Sri Lanka or, you know, on the East African coast? I don't know if you want to speak a bit about the transnationality, the post-nationality of this work in its own way, perhaps a bit more.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because in some ways I feel like I remember at some point someone used the word hyper-local to describe my art practice, and I felt like it really worked for me. This was a while back and I was in Karachi in that moment. And I had really felt over the past many years that my work is deeply, or my desire, my aspiration is for my work to be deeply grounded in the region, and very much rooted in the region and its traditions. And if that means that there is a certain degree of illegibility or inaccessibility in this work to a larger global audience, I'm quite comfortable with that. And now I'm having to rethink that question quite a bit since I'm now in Germany and constantly in conversation with different communities and a larger kind of global audience, and it is kind of something that I'm figuring out in this moment and thinking about what it means for the work to be expanding audiences, and I'm still very much in the process of figuring out how I feel about it and what my strategies with that are, how to speak about it. But I think that more specifically, beyond something between like the global and the hyperlocal, the regional, I think has been really interesting to think about, again, how this sound is a border-breaking sound, and how the sound draws connections across a certain Indian Ocean region. And I've been really interested more recently with the fact that it seems that there are multiple practices that are exploring, again, in the Indian Ocean region, exploring the connection between the sonic and the oceanic. it seems like there's a world of practices like that emerging, and that my practice maybe is situated within that world, and I'm really interested in exploring it. I'm interested in thinking about the connections between the sounds that you encounter in other coastal regions in the Indian Ocean region. So yes, it is something that I'm thinking about, and I'm really interested in exploring, and I'm in the process of doing that.
Well, I think it's also like really we also forget how so Gwadar, which is a port that is being developed by China, actually used to belong to Oman until Pakistan bought it in 1971 or something. It's quite late stage, and so it was actually part of the Omani kind of Zanzibar was owned by Oman and colonized, or whatever, the word would be in different ways, imperialism, and so it's also all these communities, it's also really, it's so recent that I think I think the communities that we come from, as I said, I come from this Mainam community, which is also a transnational community that is across the border of Sindh and Gujarat, so you're kind of going across, the kind of Indian coastal ocean by then, and how we've now been boxed into these nation states, and also, I guess, forgotten or in the process of forgetting those histories. And Zara, another question, so I love that you touched upon this idea of kind of being in conversation with all these communities when now you're in Germany. Vera and I were talking about this labor of translating. As someone who's brown in the world, your practice, I feel like half of the work we do is translation, and it's kind of super problematic, obviously, if you think about it, right? But how to do it is, of course, another question. But another question that I think of, Zara, is ethics, right? And you've been kind of really trying to also think of, because there is, of course, a lot of stuff being done in Pakistan with these communities and development work, and some of it is so deeply unethical, and as we know, and super problematic, and kind of coming up from these spaces of top-down approaches. We've seen this a bit also with this, Zara was talking about National Imaginary Pakistan Pavilion at the Dubai Expo was somehow this massive national project that Pakistan was really invested in, and it's won all these awards, and I'm oh my god, what is the Expo, the history of the Expo. No one in Pakistan wanted to have a critical understanding of what type of nation building they were trying to do through this Expo, and of course Coke Studio. But Zara, I guess maybe I wanted to also bring up maybe touch with you about kind of what is the ethics. How do you what are some of the ethical questions that you're dealing with when you're kind of working with these communities who are also under so much duress and stress, and who are maybe also not interested in this global circulation, and I know we're artists and we go around the world and stuff, but who are kind of just really invested in their very local, grounded grassroots organizations. How do you negotiate with them and engage with them?
Yeah, I think a really big part of it is my practice with Shahana with Karachi-La Jamia, and kind of what the work that I'm doing with Oceanic Feelings kind of emerges from a much larger engagement with the politics of research and knowledge production in Pakistan, and thinking through it collaboratively. You use the word ethnography, or potentially kind of tested out the word ethnography referring to my research. And I've also kind of, spent some time seeking words that could encapsulate my research methods, or in thinking about research method. And I think for me, over the course of time with working with Karachi-La Jamia and the other research projects that I've been undertaking, I think about research as a practice of building relations, and building and affirming and avowing and committing to relations. And I don't think of, and so for me, research is that kind of emerges from a certain set of relations that I'm striving to create and commit to, and that's an ongoing process. And so even with this research for Oceanic Feelings, Oceanic Feelings didn't come first, or the sound didn't come first. It was me doing, it was a set of connections that I had made, or was in the process of making, with communities that I had already been in relation with, or was desiring to be in relation with. And these kind of the research objects that emerged and that I ended up using in Oceanic Feelings, where were something that was happening on the side. And so it was there's a very kind of long period of time over which a small body of research or documentation emerges. And so yeah, I think in thinking about the research, about ethics of research and representation, it's really difficult to imagine in the world that we live in relations that are pure and completely without violence, but that is what we strive towards. And that's a kind of constant process of maintaining relations, and so that's something that I'm always striving for with the research that I do, is wherever I'm doing it with, and whichever landscape I'm doing it amidst, that I maintain relation and strive for joyful relation with it. And I think another thing for me is also working collaboratively as much as possible in every step of the way. So with Karachi La Jamia, for example, sorry, I think I haven't said enough about what exactly Karachi La Jamia is.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah, like I think a couple of...
Yeah, I'll take a moment to do that. So Karachi La Jamia started in 2015 with my longtime collaborator Shahana Rajani, who is an artist based in Pakistan as well. Both Shahana and I have also this whole time been teaching in Pakistan, Shahana in an art school and me in another university. And in 2015 we founded Karachi La Jamia, which means Karachi Anti-University, in a way to grapple with the increasing securitization, surveillance, and even harassment and devastation of the cultural and education realms and worlds in Pakistan, in Karachi more specifically. And we were somewhat shocked and alarmed by the ways in which we felt that the art community and the universities and the academic community were increasingly shrinking into silence in the face of surveillance and securitization. And so we thought of Karachi La Jamia as a pedagogical experiment through which we would strive to maintain connections between our communities as cultural practitioners and as teachers, with ongoing movements and struggles in Pakistan, in Karachi more specifically, with ongoing activist groupings and struggles that were taking place in Karachi. So what we've done since 2015 is that every year or two we organize a course in collaboration with an ongoing struggle in the city, in collaboration with activists. And it's an open course, and it's site specific. It takes place in the area where the struggle is emerging, or in the site of contestation. And we do that over a period of time. So that's Karachi La Jamia. An example is the work that we did, a 3-day workshop that we did last year with the House of Kal, a collaboration with the Many-Headed Hydra. The workshop that we did was called Friction and Flow, Environmental Resistance in the Aquatic Landscapes of Karachi. And it was, the 3-day workshop was kind of like a pilot version of a longer course that we did later on in the year. But it was in collaboration with the Pakistan Fisher Folk Forum and some other activist communities that we've been in connection and relation with. And it was, we brought together a group of students to study and learn about and be in relation with the struggle that is taking place currently in the coast of Karachi against the privatization of islands, the privatization of certain islands that is being resisted by the fisherfolk community, and also the devastation of the mangrove ecology in Karachi.
Sorry to interrupt. So in Karachi, there's all these islands just off the coast, and which are kind of not uninhabited. Of course, there are indigenous communities and fisher communities there, but now they're being sold as this future of building this grand like Karachi doesn't have a water kind of, like it doesn't have the, you know, like if you think of Istanbul or you think of like Dubai or you think of any of these mega cities of the world, you know, Karachi doesn't have this magnificent capitalist thing, and now there's this whole investment in building this great seafront, and right, so that's where we're dealing with that literally. So I think that's
So the course explored the struggle against the privatization of these islands, which are sacred sites as well for the fisherfolk community, and the devastation of the mangrove ecology and the devastation of Karachi's rivers, seasonal rivers. So that's an example of Ecology-as-intersectionality's method. And it's really through Ecology-as-intersectionality's method, it is through this kind of pedagogical process that's rooted in building relations that the research emerges. Which is of course not to say that the problems of research and representation aren't always there, but that it is a process of working through them.
And I just want to also say that I think this is like, and I think in some way you've written about this as well, but the way it's encapsulated in Pakistan, you know, you see like nude women in galleries, and somehow like these art space universities are like, oh look at us, we're so progressive, we're painting nudes, you know? And of course but for white people who think of Pakistan, they're like, oh my god, Pakistan's are painting nudes, so, like look at this, civilization has come to us or whatever. And of course that's not like what, like, you know, that's not really progressive, it's like whatever, you know, like really the real political work is actually working with these communities and these contestations, you know, and somehow also in this global discourse, I feel like a lot of the artists who circulate kind of can paint themselves like, look at me, I'm so progressive, but the political work that they need to be doing is not happening. And I always just think of that, and I actually credit Shahana and Zara for writing about this in 2015 and being like, yes, why is it that we're also obsessed with the fact that somehow we cannot represent nudity in Pakistan, and that somehow is our democracy? Like, that's not really any, like, no one cares. Zara, I don't know if we have about 20 minutes, and this is great. I want to open it up to Q&A and also people to jump in, but I also know that you wanted to share another clip and some material, like sort of videos of your research, and perhaps we can take a couple of questions and then in an organic way flow into maybe another clip if we need to.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? Do folks have any thoughts, questions, conversations, like whatever, like this is very chill.
Thank you so much for your talk, Sarah, and it's so important for me also to get to know your work more and relate to it more in the exhibition. I just had some thoughts also about, you mentioned the healing properties or the healing process of some of the audio recordings, and that also ties very nicely just to the previous talk that we had. I was maybe curious to hear more about that. And as well, I have many thoughts to engage with, also the anti-nationalistic aspect that you were talking about, the groups were sort of being positioned as, which I would be quite curious to learn more about, as that I'm just learning and hearing it as I get to know your work and your voice about it as well.
So it was a little bit hard to hear, but I think the question was about healing.
Yeah, just like the healing properties of your work. Because just before this also, Eric, like I think this ties in so well, but Eric was talking about, and I think I told you this, right? This idea of this machine of forgetting, and how like in some way, some of the works here, like he was talking about how they're like also antidotes, you know, to colonialism and kind of a form of restitution and healing. And so I think, yeah, that's what Disa is also thinking, just like with you, like thinking of healing within your work.
Yeah, I think, I think we use the word healing perhaps because of the lack of better terms, but I think, health is such a difficult thing to aspire to in this moment of extreme kind of environmental emergency. And so, to aspire towards health is to aspire, in some ways, to aspire towards something impossible. I mean, I think also in the sense that we are always in the process of dying. But I think that in some ways, I think that I'm interested in healing practices in the shadows of large-scale infrastructural violence as a method through which communities, as a method through which we cope. and as a method through which we survive despite the violence. And I'm interested in how, in these regions, so many of the methods through which healing happens or through which coping happens emerge from a different epistemological tradition, right? So, thinking about energy, a lot of my research is also in the Thar Desert, where there's coal infrastructure, which is, of course, energy infrastructure. And I've really been interested in how the kind of extractivist framework of energy infrastructure could be positioned or could be read against and alongside the ways in which local healing practices and survival practices and mystical practices are also a kind of a framework of energy, right? Healing practices are energetic practices. They are about a certain kind of transformation, often movement, often passing around of energy. The coal is also energy. The coal plant is to kind of create a certain kind of energy. And so there's two very different philosophies of energy happening over there. And I'm interested in that and thinking about how these practices emerge from epistemological traditions that can explode the logics of these infrastructural traditions or these development traditions. So in that realm, I am really interested. And then I think that in thinking about these mystical healing practices, sound comes up quite intuitively. Sound is a really big part of healing in so many traditions around the world. And I think I've also been really interested in thinking about sound, and also thinking about, like I said a little while ago, about how I've been interested in how there's so many art practices happening, emerging, that are about the connection between the sonic and the sea. And I've been thinking a lot about aniconic traditions. And aniconic traditions in Islam, but of course aniconism isn't necessarily an Islamic tradition, but there is a belief in aniconism in certain communities in Islam. But of course it predates Islam. I'm also interested in aniconism in Kabbalah, and I'm interested in aniconism in tantric traditions as well. And I think in aniconic traditions there's this real sense of the violence of representation, where there's this idea against the image. The idea is that to create an image of the world, and so because the world is a reflection of the divine, to create an image of the world is to create an image of the divine. And there's a violence to that, because to create an image means to make still what is dynamic, or to make singular what is multiple, or to flatten what is deep. And in that sense, there's this kind of real sense of the anxieties of representation that really predate how in the 20th century anxieties of representation kind of take over the modern and contemporary European art and literature worlds. And so in that sense, there's a kind of turning over there because of the impossibility or the limitations of the image. There's a turning to sound. And there's a sense of the kind of connection between sound and spirit, because sound is something that moves through air, and sound is something that is invisible in the same way. I'm also really interested in how, and Aziz, you're probably really aware of this too, growing up within an Islamic tradition, there's no image of God, but God is often in the stories that we're told. The way in which we access God is through sound or through speech. So we always kind of grew up hearing about the Prophet Muhammad's conversations with an angel, or the Prophet Moses talking to God on top of the mountain, but not being able to possibly see God, right? And so I'm interested in this kind of idea, this kind of aniconic tradition of thinking of sound as a mode through which we can access the divine and we can access infinity, and how that is, again, a kind of an oceanic understanding of sound. And in that sense, healing is about again, allowing and affirming relation in that moment with the divine. I think I might have gone off on a bit of a tangent here.
That's beautiful. I love that, and I just think that like in this world, in the surplus of images of the world, kind of think of the old. And I know Bonaventure talks about this too from Savvy Contemporary, about that the surplus of images that we live in, and kind of thinking of the sound as just like that. And I think there's a lot that can be explored within that kind of context as well. But of course, also beautiful and joyful, right? A lot of your work, like these are just music and joyful spaces, and kind of also creating resistance through joy and celebration and being together as well, which I think is really important as well as a form of healing. Are there any other questions or any other thoughts? I feel like you wanted to say, no?
Do you
want to just be super loud?
Oh yeah, I'll try.
Yeah.
Actually, it was just something I was speaking to someone about recently, but your work seems so full of like, when you were talking about energy, I felt like it's full of energy and so deep, and there's so much in it that and I just wondered if that's ever kind of sort of fought against, or you feel like you. How do you give yourself permission to be so for your work to be in practice to be so full? I don't know how that's, but I feel like there's a bit of a maybe people who see practices want to zone in on one thing at a time, but
you mean like the vastness and the complexity?
Yeah. I really like how you've spoken so much about every.
Yeah, I think I heard. I think that's such an interesting question, because again, in some ways, I think of my work as so hyper local or so niche in some ways as well, and so it's really interesting and also wonderful to hear you say that. And I think I've had anxieties about how my work could possibly circulate, because I've always understood that it's so narrow in its scope. So it is really nice to hear you say that. But I think that perhaps it's again a kind of the mystical principle. I think it's a mystical principle across mystical traditions, but I of course associate it with my own. In Sufism, where there's this idea that the whole universe is enfolded in a single dot. And so I think that in some ways, I feel like I am incredibly focused in that I'm looking, my research I think is about such a small kind of geographical site as well in some ways, and then I'm interested in how the universe could be unfolded through that one thing. But it is overwhelming sometimes. Yes, I hope I understood the question.
No, I think that's a really beautiful response, and I think thinking about that, I think this idea of fullness, right? I think somehow in this kind of very contemporary capitalist world, there's this idea of the focus and this idea of kind of certain traditions being more important than others. But I am also struck, right? I mean, when we personally read Sufi literature, it's like they were really true cosmopolitans in some way, because the way they kind of, as I said, unfolded and thought about the world in this single dot or in this single space. And I mean, the sites that you're visiting have been such dynamic spaces of human exchange and kind of people flowing through, right? And kind of communities washing through. And I think, sure, these people do not speak English in the way that we expect them to, or write in the way that, but I think the way they also embody rich oral traditions and kind of histories in their body and kind of carry it forward, I think is also a mark, right? Because there is so much in these histories that it's so rich and so complex and so deep, and I think somehow it comes from these mystical traditions, because I think because I do feel like so many of these communities do think of the world as connected, and do think of the infallibility, of the human race as this connected space, and do not actually think of themselves in these kind of focused national orientations, but kind of in these much more deeper ways. And I think a lot of them also have accepted this idea of us as being transitory and gonna all die soon, which I think is also a super anti-capitalist thing, because we're all linked to somehow like going to be eternal and forever, right? And what happens if we actually are all going to die? If we understand that we're all going to die, and I think this is something that's really embodied in a lot of these communities as being kind of not permanent either, and permanence is actually being being folly, right, as well.
Yeah, and also like permanence is being questioned in like, you know, these very ancient traditions, and how it comes to take place now that we live in a very capitalistic system in which like we are seeing it collapsing, you know, and how
the harbor will, 50 years from now the world will be there still,
So, and how once we open to this larger sense, and when she was talking about like seeing the divine within us and everything, is like how we could have access to that and make a relationship to our present in the systemic oppression, and we are like being placed, and that the communities are struggling with, and just to have a larger sense of what does that mean to exist within it, and then transcend with it and cope with it, which is like what she was talking about, like how we can create or structures or like the knowledge to cope with this, with these larger projects, and what also like it means to have it in Pakistan, but also have it here in Iceland, but also have it in other countries, like the same kind of like projection of these larger projects, like these larger corporate projects, that are profiting from the land, from the communities, from the sources, because like now you were saying that they're opening this like port in close to Oman, you were saying, right?
So around Guadalajara.
Right? That it has no, like they're envisioning these like mega projects in these spaces that like some of them I think I understood were like sacred for sacred for people. Yeah. And it's like, wow, okay, how do you wanna even like step on those, and because it means also delete part of it, that has been existing forever, and it also here in Iceland, we know that these places have been existing forever, and how you can.
And they've been sacred to a lot of communities.
Right, exactly, yeah. So, and it's like how we are gonna cope and transcend with this, or how we can create spaces of resistance, for that, and not mean resistance in a way that, or anarchy or something like that. No, it means like critical thinking and really like bring up everybody to talk about it, Yeah, thank you. I think it was very, very nice, very interesting. I think that's it.
Do you, I know we have a few minutes, but I know we're flowing also, so it's fine. Like, it's not like we're planning, like, everything in a strict way, right? But do you wanna, Zara, I don't know if you still wanna share this episode 3, like if you had a small clip that you wanted to share, perhaps we can, on this note, perhaps we can end, or I don't know, Zara, whatever feels natural to you. I'm also just reminded of that story when you're talking about sacred, when Bahariya Khan is being built, right? There is this shrine in Karachi, and apparently they refused to bulldoze it, like the workers, or like the bulldozer stopped or something. Isn't that the story? Is that what you and Chandra were talking about?
Should I tell that story?
Yeah, I think it's just a beautiful story, thinking of like the sacred of this. I don't actually know the full story. That's why I'm asking. Yeah.
So this is part of the Karachi Rajanya that me and Chandra organized together. And in Karachi Rajanya, one of the longest courses that we did was called Gadab Sessions, and so it took place in a neighborhood called Gadab, and it was in collaboration with the Karachi Indigenous Rights Alliance, who were resisting the privatization of this neighborhood for luxury real estate development. It was an agricultural neighborhood where the communities who lived there had been living there for centuries. And so we did a course there but every weekend we would go there and have sessions, have classes there over a period of 6 months. And during those 6 months was when this massive real estate development organization, which also has very close links to the Pakistani military. So as we were there over those 6 months, we were witnessing and documenting them devastating and enclosing the land of these communities. And all of this was, these transformations were happening over the course of this course. So the rapid enclosure, it's still happening to these communities right now. And one of the things that we saw in multiple places, a luxury real estate development is a site of erasure, obviously, and the erasures of the local indigenous communities and their way of life and the indigenous ecology. And what comes up instead is this kind of everywhere global development aesthetic, where this kind of new real estate development looks like it could be in Karachi, but it could also be in Dubai, it could also be in Houston, it could also be in London. It looks like it could be anywhere. That kind of development aesthetic. But what we saw, one of the things that in really moving ways was interrupting the smoothness of this new emerging real estate landscape, were these, in a couple of sites, these little graves. And what we learned was that those graves that were kind of enclosed in the middle of a road or in the middle of a little enclave of homes, and they were kind of surrounded by flags or things that kind of affirmed the sacredness of that site. What we learned was that these used to be shrines, and they were sacred shrines, and they were shrines that the indigenous communities used to visit and go on pilgrimages to, or visit every week or every day for some. And of course the real estate development monster was completely had no belief in the sacred and was completely indiscriminate about destroying everything. But somehow these spaces lasted, and we learned that what local communities told us was that in one case, for example, we were told that every time the laborers would try to drive the tractor over that grave, the tractor would break down. And they repeatedly tried to do that, to the point where the laborers were spooked and they refused to do that. And so the luxury real estate development organization had to admit to its sacredness, I suppose, and leave it there. And so there were multiple sites like that. There are multiple sites like that.
I think there's multiple stories like that in Karachi as well. And he also touched this because Karachi has this, I think most cities in South Asia have a protector saint. So Karachi's protector saint is Abdullah Shah Ghazi, and his shrine is what was literally would lap onto the ocean, and now the ocean has been pushed back, so now there's a city, but the shrine is still there. And somehow like the belief is Karachi I think has actually ever had a hurricane or a cyclone. And I guess in the non-sacred way, which is because of its location, which is like a specific kind of cove, but it's also never happened because we literally believe that Abdullah Shah Ghazi is going to protect us. So this hurricane always comes close and then actually goes away. And now there's all this development happening around the shrine as well, these skyscrapers being built. So maybe he will strike back. And I think that this one skyscraper is still not open because I think it keeps on not working perfectly. So it's Abdullah Shah Ghazi destroying it. I don't know.
I find it interesting because here in Iceland, or like we know that there are also like places that are considered that the elves live in, and they're like
who live elves? Who lives in?
The elves.
Oh, elves. Okay.
Yes, and at some point there was a documentary that was picturing this, like how the development, like the city planning, at some point have to or remove carefully a big stone to place it into, like a sacred stone that is believed to be the house of the elves, and also like the projects that have to be developed around or being considered around these, would you call it like sacred places? somehow, or energetic like vortex, no, or energetic places. So it's like I kind of find like some sort of like similarity. You know?
Right. Yeah. But I have a question. Do maybe it's a different culture, because we have also the same thing in Cameroon. Like when you have to do like urbanization in certain areas, you cannot just come and like dislocate the population. Like you have like bad luck and machines breaking down and things like that. But I want to know if like your government talks with these local indigenous people and authorities, like so that they can pay respect to the ancestors, or I don't know, the shrine of the gods of these people, so they can carry on like beneficial works. I don't know how to say it, but not like just construct roads maybe, or something that can be beneficial also for the local or indigenous community, not just maybe estates or I don't know.
Sorry, I couldn't hear clearly, but I get I think just because of the distance, if that question could be.
Yeah, sorry. Zara, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I think if I'm translating this correctly, so what is your name?
Phoebe.
Phoebe was saying that, because Phoebe's talking about coming from Cameroon and kind of also thinking of like local kind of stories which are similar as well, but also talking about, is there like a discourse between the government and these local indigenous communities about kind of in conversation about kind of paying respect to their shrines and but also kind of collaborating with them on this development in some way, or kind of bringing them into this conversation about kind of still preserving this, but also kind of allowing these projects to emerge or something.
But I think also she was addressing.
Sorry, 1 second. Do you want to answer?
I think she also was addressing that the fact that these projects could bring a beneficial, like economic benefit
like how
for the communities.
Like if we're talking about these projects also being beneficial to these communities potentially, like how are they, sold or negotiated?
Okay. So let me just make sure I understand the question. That is there any conversation between the government and these communities where like their heritage is being safeguarded and the sacred spaces are being safeguarded in some way? Is that the question?
I don't
Do you
know.
want to maybe come to the
Oh, okay.
This is the mic, right?
Okay.
No,
Can you hear?
Computer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay, so I was like asking if there's a collaboration between the government and these indigenous communities on one side, and also certain projects are not just like invading the spaces, I mean in quotes, but also beneficial in an economic way. So are they included, or is a conversation between the government and these communities going on? Because in some cases it can be like road construction, and maybe a highway has to pass near maybe their village, and it's not very far from the shrine or something like that. And sometimes they have like to turn around. Like I take an example, like in capital of for one capital of Cameroon, like they wanted to construct like this nice road, and they had like this indigenous population living there for so long, but then the government wanted to make it like beautiful, so they relocated the population, but then they said we have all our like ancestors and our trees and shrines and all those things here, you cannot just relocate a population just like that. So the government had to like pay them like restitution, and also leave certain trees not like chopped down, just to pay respect to their communities. So I don't know if you have the same things happening.
Yeah, that's an interesting and important question, which unfolds so many things that are really important here. Yeah, it really varies. In the case of Gadap that I was just speaking of, the government had completely colluded with the real estate development organization and illegally sold these people's land to the real estate developers. And because this neighborhood is at the peripheries of the city and more far-flung, and because the communities there are incredibly impoverished, there was complete impunity in destroying everything. And so really there was, so the stories about the tractors breaking down and that being the only reason those cases stayed felt believable in that sense, because there weren't any protective measures. There wasn't really anyone protecting these spaces except the villagers themselves, who had very little power, political power in that situation. and were being brutalized incredibly, right? An example of something that happened there is that there was a pilgrimage site of so the communities who live there ethnically, they're called Baloch or Sindhi. And so a really, really important, perhaps the most important saint, one of the most important saints of Sindh, of for this ethnicity, was a saint known as Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai. And the story of Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai, like many saints, he was a wanderer. And the community in Gadap believed that he had stopped in Gadap at one point, and a lot of his poetry was, the community in Gadap believes that a lot of his poetry was about that landscape. And they created a shrine, or what is called a tikana, for the place that Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai stopped at. And people were constantly engaging with it as a sacred space. It was probably one of the most sacred sites of that neighborhood. And that site was destroyed. And in the place of that site, the real estate developers built what they described as the second largest mosque in Asia, or perhaps the second largest mosque in the world. I'm forgetting now since it's been a few years. And it was said that it could have 800,000 people could offer prayers in that mosque at the same time. And so this kind of idea of like showing off about the scale and the kind of the devotion of this real estate, the firm itself. And what you see over here, what you see over here is a kind of a contestation between two different forms of Islam and two different forms of devotion and practices of devotion. And these indigenous practices of devotion are again very much outside of the kind of Islam that the state patronizes and wants to see practiced in Pakistan. And so the destruction of the indigenous sacred site to have a mosque that is modeled off of Turkish architecture that can house 800,000 people praying at the same time, this kind of really large scale monument kind of for the new Pakistani nationalism is very intentional. And the local communities believed that it was specifically to spite them. They believed that the bathrooms of that mosque were created in precisely the place that was the sacred site. And that was done not just to kind of add more salt to the wounds, right? So that's the extent of the violence to the sacred practice in that region. But on the other hand, in the south...
Can I just jump in here? And I just wanted to say that actually it's so crazy also to think about how art world capital flows, that the architecture firm that designed this mosque is also one of the biggest donors to the Lahore Biennial. You know? And if you just think of and these are completely enmeshed in global, and unfortunately the Lahore Biennial is actually one of the best. The biggest patrons of really cool art coming out of Pakistan, beyond just whatever paintings and things like that. So just also how all of this gets back and mashed into art world capital, I think, is something that we can never escape as artists in this world. I mean, you use the word art worker. Who was using that word? Viola, art worker. I mean, sorry.
See that also, on the other hand, the shrine that Aziz was mentioning, which is the shrine of the patron saint of Karachi, and that shrine is in a more affluent part of Karachi, and in a very visible part of Karachi for the affluent and the powerful. That shrine is right next to another development by the same real estate developers, and it's a skyscraper that they've made. And again, when that skyscraper was being made right next to the shrine, there was a sense that this is a kind of a desecration of the shrine, because the shrine was kind of built at a height, and the idea that this skyscraper could kind of belittle it in that way by being so tall or being able to see into it in that way felt like an insult. And in order to kind of wash over that violence, the real estate development organization, instead of kind of building on and destroying this shrine as they did in the other end of Karachi, this one they kind of did I don't know what the word would be, but they developed the shrine as well. So they kind of presented themselves as, while they're building the skyscraper on the one side, they're also then beautifying and helping to develop and fix up and restore this shrine that's right next to it. But again, in developing and restoring this shrine, the aesthetics of it were changed again to reflect away from that kind of indigenous devotional visuality and instead reflect this new transnational Islam visuality that Pakistan believes the Pakistani state is trying to, is more invested in. So
Zara, we've gone over, and I think perhaps maybe this is, we don't even, I think we don't have to, I mean, we can, people can also listen, I think, to this for the episode 3, whatever you want. I mean, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think if we're out of, I think that if we're out of time, then, I mean, the exhibition is right there, so people can listen there well.
Yeah, no, only if you're, but maybe you can show one image, you said, an image from your research, I think, that's because I just the closing. Yeah. But in the same time, I just wanted to sort of say it's a great privilege to bring this discourse here and kind of be in this conversation. This is also marking, as our ends, the official launch of Many-Headed Hydra Z number 5, Harbor Failures, and may all these people who are resisting, and working in these rivers, oceans, seas, as you say, what is it? Oceans, rivers, the oceans, lakes, and the seas cause the failure of all of these skyscrapers and these development projects, and they sink. Well, a lot of them are actually sinking, so it's like we're okay with that. And I think one of the kind of ways that we're also linking with the harbor failures, we have multiple contributions which you can go through, but one is with Lakuluk Williamson Balpori, who is based in Greenland.
Based in Canada. He's a
Greenlandic Inuit origin, poet, writer, performer, and who's written this beautiful poem as well, thinking of these histories of communities who have been erased and kind of, as I said, kind of made precarious
and displaced,
displaced through kind of this development of an imagination of development of the Canadian North. So I think this is I think on this note we can end it. I mean, I'm sure we can all after this go into the space as well. But Zara, I don't know if you have any closing remarks after this. I know we're going to go into Lakuluk's work, which is a great transition point. But Zara, I don't know if you,
No closing remarks. I hope you will engage with the work in this space.
Thank you so much, Zara. Lots of love. Bye. And this is our section. So should we take a 5-minute break until you want to transition? Okay. Because I know that was long and intense. Yes. Thank you so much, Ravi. Yes.
Bathory is participating also in the magazine of Manhattan Hydra, a beautiful poem there by her about displaced Inuit in Canada. I would just recommend that you read it with your own voice. I don't feel like I want to take that space of reading that poem for you out loud. Something maybe, hopefully in the future, we will have Lagaluk herself present. Unfortunately, because of changes, she was not able to be present with us here today. And so we will instead screen, you can find it as well on YouTube, a very impactful performance by her that she did in the middle of lockdown in 2020 at the Fellini Fine Arts Institute that is promoting and organized around indigenous art. I will also just read briefly her bio to just introduce her a bit and speak a little bit about this performance that you're going to be viewing. I might turn up the volume if I don't feel it's high enough when we start, because just viewing this in the computer, it was quite a journey to take with her, and I'm happy to be presenting a piece of her art in our space today, and I want you to feel the immersiveness of it as well. So just to read up her bio, Lagaluk Bathory is a Kalalik, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Atlantic Inuit performance artist, poet, actor, curator, storyteller, and writer. She is known for performing, now I'm not sure I can pronounce it, Uayerdik, Greenlandic mask dance. She performs internationally, collaborates with other artists, and is a fierce advocate for Inuit artists. So what I've learned from talking with her and viewing her work, the Greenlandic mask dance is a tradition of storytelling that is supposed to challenge the audience and to bring forth any kind of emotions that are brought up in the space as it's being performed. This performance is storytelling of the changing seasons and the shifts of them. So without further ado, I'll just start to play this YouTube video, and I might, as I said, pump up the volume just so we could be impacted by that emotion that she is presenting with us today.
Is it connected to the speaker?
Yeah, it's silent in the beginning, but if you could close the door, maybe.
Acknowledge the children. See their eyes, their hands, their feet. Listen to their heartbeats. Smell their breath. Acknowledge the fatherless children and see the passages of men. Acknowledge the children who died alone. See the loneliness. Acknowledge the frightened children and see the anger. Acknowledge the hungry children and see the ocean. Acknowledge the hurting children. See the vengeance. Acknowledge the cold children. See the broken seas. Acknowledge the homeless children. And see the homelands. See the homelands. Delicate bones covered in moss. Noses nuzzling the ground, the air. Water trickling between stones, gills opening and closing. Small fingertips dip into freezing salt water
across wind-red faces. Little boots test the depths of pulse. Breast to mouth, hand to mouth, mouth to mouth. See the children. Ilanigo. Sila. Da doing Ireland. It is said to be a part of our reality. That before there was light, there was only darkness. And people spent a long time inside, sitting on the sleeping bench and staring at each other in the eye. Sometimes this life of being inside, being in the dark, got to be too much. So much that people would decide to throw a party where all sorts of games were played. Games for men, for women, for boys, for girls. And one such game was called Uhiking. You see, a push, this lamp, it works with a long wick. And if you dampen that wick, all the light that comes out is just murky. A murky kind of light where you can't really see what is happening on the other side of the room. And you can only just barely make out what your own hands are doing. When they played Hushiking, the dimming of the lights game, any fantasy went. Any sexual fantasy you had, you were allowed to follow. You could swap spouses. You could change genders. You could even just sit in the middle of the room and tickle yourself with a feather. Any fantasy. One woman noticed that over the years that she played the game, so many different people came to see her. But she developed a relationship with one. They knew each other completely inside and out. Every breath, every smell, every little muscle, they knew one another. But she never knew who he was outside of the game. Because the rules of the game are that when the light becomes bright once more, you could not say. You could not make any notice. You couldn't hear. You couldn't mention a single thing that happened in the game. But this woman, she was full of foreboding. And she had to find out who this man was. So she waited until the next time they played. And she dipped her fingers into the lamp so that they were covered in black, oily soot. And sure enough, her lover came to her. And they touched and they squeezed and they licked and they pushed and they pulled and they did all the things that they have always done all of these years together. And she streaked her sooty fingers across his face so that he was marked. And sure enough, when the lights came back, she saw he too took off across the town. Now these two, their run was so passionate that they began to lift off the ground. And the sister flew up into the sky and became Suttikinat, the sun. And the brother flew up into the sky and became Animak, the moon. The two of them are always running, but they will never, never meet. Sila, taasina po. Inminu dari talayakin. Kung nakibiyakin na, kaman ako sa bahay. Pero gusto ko kung nakibiyakin na, sakit ako sa bahay. Masikot sila taasina po. Isinisuli ang kasapatan na. Sakit na kanina ang bisyo. Sakit Test the depths of roots. Breast to mouth, hand to mouth, mouth to mouth. See the children. Buena. Thank you.
Apologies for the other not being loud enough. We will also share the link, and you're welcome to view it with better conditions. But this was our last contribution for today. And thank you so much for joining us. We will be back again tomorrow from 2 to 6, starting with Pippi having a lecture on stress plants in the global warming. Very simply, I'll let the scientists talk tomorrow. And then we will as well have Viola and Anya speaking about migration and plants. And then Aviaya Hauptmann will speak about Inuit microbiology and food waste. And then in the last but not least will be T.J Demos speaking a bit around this concept of ecology-as-intersectionality, with this seminar or discursive platform is framed around or titled. So please join us tomorrow, and thank you again for today.
Thank you.